The year had been kind. Spring had brought rains that sank deep into the soil, filling the roots with strength. Summer had stretched long and warm across the valley, the sun ripening every stem and branch. By the waning of August, the orchards behind the village stood heavy with promise. The apple trees bent beneath their burden. Branches arched low to the earth, their leaves dark and glossy, their fruit swelling with color. Red and gold gleamed among the green, as if each tree bore lanterns strung by unseen hands. The air itself was sweet, touched with the perfume of ripening fruit. Even the bees that hummed through the branches seemed slower, drowsy with abundance. The villagers walked the rows with satisfaction in their eyes. Men wiped sweat from their brows and measured the harvest with a glance, speaking of carts to be filled and markets to be supplied. Women counted silently, imagining shelves lined with jars of preserves, kitchens fragrant with pies, children's mouths sticky with juice. The children themselves could hardly be restrained, their hands forever reaching for the lowest fruit, their eyes wide with hunger. But always they were driven back with the same words, "Not yet. Not yet. Let them ripen a little more." Even the old men, bent and weary with memory, could not hide their relief. They had seen lean years, orchards struck by frost, summers starved of rain. They had watched trees stand barren, their branches brittle and black. Yet this season seemed different. This year, the trees swelled with generosity, as if making amends for all the years of hunger. "God has blessed us," the elders said. "There will be bread with apples, there will be cider, there will be winter stores. No mouth will go empty." At dusk, the orchards glowed. The last light of the sun caught on the fruit and turned the rows into rivers of fire. The voices of the children rang between the trees, the calls of the women carried from the well. The smell of wood smoke rose from the hearths, mingling with the perfume of apples, and all was peace. It was a harvest that promised fullness, safety, joy. And yet, in the silence between the rustle of leaves and the hum of bees, the earth seemed to wait, as though it knew that abundance is never given without a price. No one noticed. No one guessed that in a single night, the promise of the orchard would crumble into dust. And far along the road, hooves were already moving toward the village. It was at dawn that the first unease entered the orchard. Mist still hung over the fields, thick and low, veiling the grass in silver. The village stirred slowly, fires being lit, pails lowered into wells, roosters calling the day awake. And yet, before the smoke rose straight into the sky, before the children's laughter reached the lanes, a shape already stood among the apple trees. She was white. The mare's coat caught the pale light of morning with a glow so stark it seemed unearthly, every line of her body outlined in a cold gleam. No bridle marked her, no rope, no rider. Her mane, long and uncombed, fell like water down her neck. She was neither thin nor gaunt, but strong, her muscles taut beneath her skin, her stance calm and terrible at once. She stood motionless between two trees laden with fruit. Not grazing. Not pawing. Not restless as horses are. She only stood, as though the orchard had been planted around her, as though her hooves had taken root in the earth. A boy saw her first. He had slipped away from his mother, hoping to pluck an apple before breakfast. He stopped short when his eyes fell upon her. His breath caught. The apple he reached for slipped from his fingers and rolled into the grass. Later, he would not recall how long he stood staring. Only the weight of her gaze remained in his memory, steady and heavy, as if she looked through him, past him, into something deeper. When he cried out, others came. Men with tools in their hands, women wiping flour from their palms, the curious and the cautious. They found the mare as he had seen her, white against the mist, still as stone. Some muttered that she had wandered from a distant farm. Yet no brand marked her flank, no tether trailed from her neck. Others crossed themselves and whispered, "A spirit horse. A herald." The old folk exchanged glances but spoke no word. The mare did not stir as the villagers watched. She did not blink. Even when the sun lifted higher and the mist began to burn away, she stood, pale and unyielding, her breath rising faint in the cool air. And though no apple yet had fallen, the people felt it, the orchard no longer belonged to them. Something had entered it. Something that had come not to feed, but to wait. At first, it seemed a small thing. An apple dropped from a branch. It rolled once across the grass and came to rest at the mare's hoof. Such things happen, the people thought. A ripe fruit loosed by the breeze. Yet there was no wind that morning, and the apple had hung firm only moments before. A child bent to pick it up, and cried out. For in his hand the apple darkened, the skin shriveling beneath his touch. Its red faded to brown, then to gray. And before their eyes, it crumbled, the flesh collapsing inward, the skin splitting like old paper, until nothing remained but a scatter of dry dust on his palm. The villagers drew back in horror. Then another fell. And another. A rain of apples, not soft and bountiful but sudden, sharp, as though the trees were being shaken by unseen hands. Each struck the ground with a dull thud, and each, when lifted, was already collapsing into powder, leaving only stems and husks that blew apart into grass. The orchard filled with the sound, the thumping of fruit against earth, the dry crackle of skins breaking, the strange, hollow sigh as dust rose into the air. The children screamed, their laughter gone. Women clutched them close, their own eyes wide with terror. Men tried to shout for calm, but their voices faltered as the apples fell faster, the trees shedding their harvest before its time. Through it all, the mare did not move. She stood among the trees as though carved of white stone, her head high, her gaze steady. The dust swirled around her legs, settling in pale rings about her hooves, but she did not stir. By the time the sun stood high, the orchard floor was littered not with apples but with ash. The baskets prepared for harvest lay empty. The people who had come with joy now stood in silence, clutching their throats against the bitter taste of dust. And in their hearts grew the first seed of fear. What had once promised life now gave only ruin. The orchard did not recover. Each day more apples dropped before their time, their weight loosed from the branches as if the trees themselves had grown weary of holding them. And each time they touched the ground, they broke, collapsing into powder, leaving only gray patches where sweet fruit should have lain. By the week's end, whole rows of trees were bare, their limbs stretched like the arms of beggars. The villagers argued, their voices sharp and uneasy. Some said the mare was a blessing turned strange, a gift misunderstood. She has come to test us, they whispered. If we endure, the fruit will return richer than before. White horses are holy. Others spat at the very thought. Holy? She is a blight. Look at her, standing there as though the orchard is hers. Look how the fruit rots at her feet. No blessing wastes what has been given. The elders, gray and bent, remembered old stories. They spoke of pale horses that wandered the earth not to graze but to herald endings. In one tale, such a mare walked through barley and left the fields hollow. In another, it stood at the edge of a village and the wells dried by morning. They do not feed, one elder whispered. They do not labor. They only wait, and where they wait, life thins. The younger men grew restless. They muttered about ropes and whips, about driving the mare away. Yet none dared step closer than the edge of the orchard. For each time they looked into her eyes, black, steady, endless, their hands grew weak, their voices faltered. Some swore her gaze pressed into them like a weight, heavy enough to still the very breath in their lungs. Meanwhile, the dust thickened. It clung to their clothes, crept into their food, choked their sleep. Children coughed at night, their throats raw, their lips dry. Mothers tried to sweep the gray powder from their doorsteps, but it always returned, carried on the faintest of winds from the orchard. And all the while the mare remained. She did not eat. She did not stir. She only stood among the trees, watching as the fruit of the village fell to ruin. Doubt grew. Fear deepened. And in both, the people began to see the truth. This harvest was not theirs. It belonged to her. By the third week, the orchard stood hollow. Where once the branches had bowed under fruit, now they reached upward bare and brittle, their bark dulled, their leaves hanging limp. The ground, once carpeted with grass and fallen apples, lay thick with gray dust. Each step sent a pale cloud into the air, rising like smoke from a fire that never burned. The villagers walked the rows in silence, their baskets clutched useless in their hands. Children clung to their mothers' skirts, coughing. Men covered their mouths with cloth, though it did little good. The dust seeped into everything, into food, into beds, into the cracks of their very skin. It lay across windowsills, thickened the air in the houses, and drifted into the wells until even water tasted bitter. By dawn each morning, more leaves had fallen. By dusk, the trees looked older than they were, as though years of decay had passed in hours. Birds no longer sang in the branches. The bees that once thickened the air with their hum were gone. No animal entered the orchard now, save the mare. She remained. Always in the same place, always in the same stance. Pale against the withered trees, she stood as if carved into the earth itself. And if she moved, no one saw it. She was simply there, at morning, at noon, at night, her hooves ringed by dust, her eyes reflecting nothing but a depth that chilled the bone. At first, the villagers tried to gather the fallen fruit quickly, before it could collapse. They hurried to snatch apples from the ground, wiping them clean, tucking them into their baskets. But the moment they touched the fruit, it crumbled. The red skin split in their hands, the flesh dissolved between their fingers, and they were left clutching handfuls of powder. Soon, no one tried. The orchard that had promised plenty now gave nothing. Nothing but dust that stung the lungs, filled the air, and coated the world in gray. The children grew thin, the cattle restless. The bread oven stood cold. And still the mare stood in her place, silent and patient, as though she waited for the last leaf to fall. And when the wind carried the dust into the village itself, coating every doorstep, every bowl, every breath, the people knew the orchard was not merely lost. It was consuming them. The villagers could not endure the silence any longer. Day after day, the mare remained in the orchard, unmoving, unyielding, her pale body stark against the trees that had withered into skeletons. The people watched her from the lanes, from the windows of their homes, from the square where the dust now drifted like fine snow. Always she was there, a fixed point in a world unraveling. Whispers spread until they swelled into plans. Some men said the mare must be caught. They came with ropes and halters, with poles and hooks, with the tools used to break stubborn beasts. Their boots sank into the gray powder as they advanced. Yet when they drew close, their courage faltered. The mare did not rear or flee. She only turned her head slowly, her eyes meeting theirs. Dark, depthless, unblinking. One by one, their hands weakened, the rope slid uselessly to the ground, and the men stumbled back with dry mouths and trembling limbs. Others swore she must be driven away with fire. Torches were lit, their flames wavering against the pale sky. But the moment the bearers crossed into the orchard, the torches sputtered. The fire hissed and shrank until it was no more than smoke curling from the tips of blackened rags. No flame would burn in her presence. The villagers fled, their voices hoarse, their eyes wild. A few whispered of sacrifice, that the mare had come as a herald of hunger, demanding payment in blood. But no one dared speak it aloud in the square. No one dared name whose blood it should be. And still she stood. Children asked their mothers what the horse wanted. The mothers hushed them, but their own lips trembled. The elders, once proud in their wisdom, now stared into the dust and muttered of omens too old to remember clearly, of white beasts that waited until the land bent to them. The people waited too. Waited for a sign, for a voice, for a moment of mercy. Waited for the mare to move, to leave, to free them from her stillness. But each morning the orchard was the same, bare trees, gray ground, the white mare at its heart. And in the waiting, despair rooted deeper than hunger. For the villagers began to understand, the mare had no answer. She was the answer. It happened without witness. One morning the villagers woke to find the orchard empty. The mare was gone. No hoofprints marked the dust, no trail led into the fields. She had stood among them for days uncounted, her presence heavy as stone, and now she had vanished as though she had never been. But her absence brought no relief. The orchard was dead. The trees that once bowed with fruit now leaned brittle and hollow, their bark peeling in strips. The last of the leaves had fallen in the night, covering the ground in a frail carpet that crumbled at the touch. The air smelled of rot and dryness, both sharp and bitter. The people walked among the rows in silence. Children no longer reached for the branches. Women did not bring baskets. Men carried no ladders, no tools. There was nothing left to gather. The harvest they had dreamed of, pies, cider, jars of preserves, lay scattered in dust. The promises of abundance had dissolved into emptiness. In the village, the dust remained. It coated every step, every doorway, every bed. The wells grew shallow, the cattle thin, the children hollow-eyed. Even the birds seemed to avoid the place, their calls fading to nothing. The people went about their days slowly, as if their lives, too, had been drained of color. Yet none spoke of the mare openly. They only whispered, for fear that to name her would call her back. And in their whispers, one truth returned again and again. Where she stands, life does not endure. Where she waits, all promise withers. And though the white mare was gone, her shadow lay heavy still, in the orchard turned to dust, in the hollow bellies of children, in the silence that grew thicker with each passing day. So the tale was carried beyond the village, carried by traders and wanderers, until it was told by firelight in distant places. When the white mare stood in the orchard, every apple fell before its time and turned to dust. And those who heard it would shiver, as if the sound of her hooves had reached them too, far beyond the orchard's edge.